Okay, I know that it's 2026 as of now, and specifically April 1st of that year, making 4 months since my compilation of my top 30, along with my reviews for both Season 2 and 3, not released yet. But I wanted to make a simpler video where I could finally rant about some coasters, and given that April 1st is a great day to release content, I decided to give my genuine thoughts on 10 coasters that either were underwhelming, boring, or stupid enough to ride experience. Now, of course, in order to make this an interesting list, I've decided to give some rules. After all, it would be uninteresting to rank boring kiddie coasters or traveling coasters that barely do anything. And after all, would defeat the purpose to write a script about this if my genuine bottom 10 was a script about, boring kiddie coasters. So, for the purpose of this script, those will be reserved for honorable mentions only. Additionally, not every coaster here is something that I dislike. Probably the reason as to why I hesitated making this list, but I would want to say that their flaws are what makes their coasters down so low. Okay? Good. Here are some honorable mentions for my coasters that are better than ranking number 10 that are somewhat notable from my experience. Okay, first off is Tidal Twister. This was a Skyline Horizon layout that was more quirky than thrilling. As a first inversion coaster, it was quite solid for me, holding mild but sustained hang time with multiple passes, and the inversion was repeated multiple times, as stated. Otherwise, there wasn't much as the multi-passes launches were quite slow and gradual, along with no forces of turn or airtime hill. Plus, it did have some jarring shakes during the tires, but thankfully I wasn't ever experiencing pain or discomfort with this. Plus, at least I could have predicted those, but since the tires were visible and spaced out compared to other tire launch coasters. But really, I do think that there are probably bigger problems outside of the ride experience, in my opinion, which I think I should go in more in depth later on. Arctic Rescue. Next is the other tire launch coaster, SeaWorld San Diego's history. Now, interestingly, I did grow stronger distaste for this thing from my most recent rides in October, but don't get me wrong, I still like the launches, where it had nice longitudinal forces that pulled my upper body back. Through rewriting this, I've noticed considerably weaker forces and lack of forces in the back row. The positive G's don't feel notable at all, laterals are barely noticeable with only a couple of instances, and the coaster had a consistent bumpiness that's quite annoying when the train holding little bracing for your back. I still find the twisty layout mildly creative and interesting, but the ride experience wise I don't find it that much interesting. Then, Goofy Sky School has pretty cool laterals on top of its first half, but the second half has no forces and quite trim. I personally think that Technocoaster does a better job for a Wild Mouse in a department that keeps them consistently. And then, as well, this includes that a Disney coaster that lacks theming and severely was with a lot of trim. Half Pipe is the ride at Eagles Gardens that has nice launches and positives, but repetitive and rough course, so not the best layout really. Twister 3 Storm Chaser, which has interesting laterals, but felt more like a family thrill coaster, which is fine, but it doesn't really have much else outside of okay laterals and some jackhammering valley that I didn't find too uncomfortable. Canyon Blaster, the Adventure Dome, has pretty forceful loops that gives Viper its run of its money for the most forceful arrow I've been on. And nice airtime on the airtime hill, but outside of that, I didn't find it too engaging. The corkscrews and helix, I don't find to have force really, plus it had constant bumps during the track. So really, I would say I'd rather stick with Viper at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Big Apple Coaster is the most mixed I've been on for any roller coaster. While I really like the length of the ride plus some elements like the dive loop and the first drop, much of the ride has long segments of track not doing much, which includes a very tedious segment after mid-course that takes dozens of seconds accomplishing back to the thrill segment. So yeah. Professor Screamer Skywinder may be the most roughest coaster on the list, but a lot of the elements were quite fun and forceful and the elements flew well. Really, when the elements hit, they were quite fun, even if there was a few moments of discomfort. Final honorable mention is pretty much the highest ranked coaster since my re-rides in January with Belmont Dipper. Now, this was surprisingly a violent ride, in both in good and bad ways. A lot of the forces felt unhinged, as many laterals are present, along with a lot of forceful jackhammering and transitions that feel a bit too abrupt. Now, the ride is still awesome at night, but I would be lying if I told you that the coaster felt comfortable. Okay, so awesome. We got all through all my honorable mentions that aren't really a big deal, but so let's start off with the list with number 10. Okay, so for the list I've hesitated on doing because I've doubted that there was barely any bad coasters to fulfill one. And really, I kind of felt bad for placing this coaster here, but Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios Hollywood felt underwhelming. Now, with the ride, the coaster would have solid length and tricks, like an entire dark ride scene plus 3 launches, and a spoiler sounds awesome, but much of the layout felt like it meandered a lot, having shallow bank turns that really don't have the spaghetti-full aspect compared to Flight of Fear. Some parts have a slight vibration too, meaning that not glass smooth, although nothing would feel uncomfortable. Then and I'll say this, I know this is a much older ride, but I kind of feel like that some of this concept was probably done better with Galacticoaster. Like, considering the layout of that ride, I would say that that is at least much more twisty and all, more weaving around, and even more it's like more engaging movement, even if the forces weren't much there, and really that felt much more faster paced compared to Revenge of the Mummy, despite having similar statistics. In addition, after the first launch, only cardboard cutouts of the monsters plus a screen that's quite visible after the second launch, where screens of scarabs are also present. Finally, the story is completed in an anticlimactic way with the turntable into the station, without the theming really, which is something that Galacticoaster doesn't have, I would say. Quite weak for a Universal Park if I'm being honest. That said, the coaster is still at number 10 because at the very least the initial dark ride scene before the first launch was pretty cool, having a few scenes to take in the atmosphere, plus 3 nice floater pops up front on the right side of the train. But the thing is that the coaster feels quite incomplete, as the in-coaster moments started solid but then kind of weakened towards the end. So yeah, I would have said that a more modern option like an art engineering launch coaster or even something from Intamin would actually work, but what do I know, this ride is like 20 years old, back in 2006, and yeah. But regardless, let's move on to number 9. So before going to announce number 9, I'd like to state that I have some polarizing results doing this coaster. Now, despite liking the layout and the front row and enjoying the coaster, I'd personally say that the back row of Mind Eraser at Elitch Garden wasn't too cool. Now, for context, Mind Eraser is still the same amount of rough as before, but when in the front, I was thrown in abrupt but sustained forces of positives and lateral to distract me and later forget the roughness, which was a very fun sensation to be done in the front row. Basically just being compressed in a way that really doesn't gradually push you in. That versus the back row that really much lacked in forces. Now, I still find the exit of the rollover and Sidewinder to have pretty forceful valleys, but outside of those brief moments of interest, it was nothing but wobbling back and forth along for many of the valleys and lateral slams on some of the twistier inversions. Not to say any awful moments, but ones that were annoying and tire-inducing for, let's say, the body. I'm glad that they enjoyed the front row of Mind Eraser and my soul ride on Professor Schremar's Skywinder, as I find enjoying a coaster that like this much more interesting over calling something rough and boring. And yet, this was a bit exhausting to my spine too, as I did have some muscle stiffening afterwards. But so yeah, I guess there was a negative point to Mind Eraser, but I still really like the Vekoma SLC layout. There's no changing that opinion. But fine, if you want me to give Mind Eraser back so the benefit of the doubt, I'd say that the layout isn't as meandering as Firebird, our number 8. Where Mind Eraser is pretty fast paced, a lot of the Firebird has a lack of sense of speed, as a lot of turns are drawn out and it's a quite long ride experience. Not really doing anything outside of a couple turns, which I would note later. In addition, some moments hold rough potholes, like the vertical loop entrances and exits, plus some bumpiness at the majority of the turns. Although compared to Mind Racer and a few other coasters out there, the roughness wasn't awful as much as it wasn't too frequent in bumpiness. Firebird really had 3 moments of force in the back left row. The first was this turnaround drop having a nice floater pop as the train banked right to left when descending. A very weak pop from descending the mid-course track, and likely my favorite moment at Six Flags America, surprisingly, well, debatably, a really snappy and violent snap on the corkscrew, having this abrupt lateral snap towards the apex of the corkscrew. This corkscrew givery was genuinely above average compared to other B&Ms, and the only the point where the only one I found more intense was the wingovers and Batman Arrive, and the main reason why it's not any lower. But for the lack of interesting moments for a semi-long ride experience, it isn't the most positive outcome for me. So, bleh. Up next is a coaster that I kind of enjoy, but at the same time looking more critically makes me realize that this coaster could have been a lot more. At number 7, Incredicoaster is a coaster that I know people are going to be more fond of, given that this is many people's first inversion, along with a really long experience that's a nice novelty for a coaster to last more than just 90 seconds. I even had a great experience hanging out with people that I knew in the queue line that I know liked the experience. So sorry if I had to be critical about this for the 4th time in a script as of writing this, but overall I find this coaster to be underwhelming for a ride of this size. For a ride with concepts of like what Incredicoaster has, a mile-long family thrill launch coaster with theming and a story, not mentioning that this is an Intamin that exceeds 100 feet tall. Intamin has made layouts that hold very diverse and interesting layouts, even in their family coasters. So whatever the decision to open up Incredicoaster, much of the ride has a lot of shallow hills and long, drawn-out turns. Much longer turns compared to a lot of classic wooden coasters, like both church wooden coasters in California, basically the Giant Dippers, or probably the most iconic wooden coaster, the Cyclone. Even if Intamin wasn't trying to replicate the windy turns or more compact coasters, Intamin also made wooden coasters and within the company, where much of their hills and turns were compact enough to offer laterals or even airtime. At least even with Intamin or outside of Intamin. Both extreme or gentler airtime, and really felt a bit of a shame towards the very drawn-out transitions based on the information explained. This feels even more noticeable with the very long length, filling in more time and making me realize what little force-wise it really is. In addition to the thrills, there's also a story about the Incredibles, which I don't know about you, but I feel like very little was done to really immerse the rider into the chaotic story that they wanted to convey based on the pre-shows and dialogue. Really, statue figures are present in the screen tunnels trying to control an out-of-control Jack. But if this is a super-powered baby, then why is it the coaster still kept intact? Why aren't there any special effects that convince the rider that the super-powered baby is moving rapidly? I would rather have no story to this launched looping coaster of a mile over mile of track that appears to be wood by structure themed to incredible, as a lot of plot holes are present when including a more ambitious concept thanks to the lack of practical sets. And really, I feel like that sets are also important to like convey some sort of message, and in doing like not much. It's just like it's like it kind of feels a bit like lazy. For Disney, of course, there it's like you could probably do something else with like with other companies, and they may feel a little bit it's like less impactful. But yeah, this ride just seems to be very noisy and long ride, as my impression. The main saving graces though are the moments with forces, such as the holding a sustained launch that was sustained for around 5 seconds, nice laterals on a few turns, and positives on one the valleys of the inversions. But to be fair with Incredicoaster, I found it to be a quite underwhelming experience and arguably the worst dark ride on the list. And that includes some of the lower ones here. But yeah, moving on to number 6, which is a weird spot for number 6. And I know 7 was a bit of a critique on the pacing and the lack of forces, but to some credit, I did enjoy Timbuli more. Although that's not the reason why it's my lowest ranked inversion coaster. If you remember X2, you know that about the complaints about that coaster about the flipping. Not that it's the most uncomfortable or nauseating, but the fact that the flips are not the most forceful, thanks to the hinge being much more heart-lined. In which, in terms of flipping, it feels quite more fun and more chaotic in the next two due to randomized flips and rapid turns. That said, with the heart lining with like these both Timbili and X2, it's not there's not too much force where it just yanks the rider, and which that's something that I usually like looking forward into. But the difference between X2 and Timbili is that coaster, Timbili, doesn't really hold much forces. And really that's pretty much the biggest crutch of the ride. Like, it's a good for a flat ride, but it doesn't do anything force-wise as a coaster. Where rides use curvature to push forces down, or up, or in other directions, and that's where it kind of feels underwhelming. I mean, at the very least, Incredicoaster did have a launch in a loop that I found to be quite forceful. But for me, I was like, as a person that really just only considers the forces, and that's the primary thing I look for a coaster. I'm sorry for those that look forward for other aspects. This coaster really had nothing for me, which is a bit of a shame, as I would have been very interested in doing a 40 coaster that did have like much more like whippy like flips. Really, it's mainly the Zack spins and perhaps the PAX Boomerang in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan for coasters with intense flipping. But alas, all locations are quite remote for me, as many of these parks aren't the biggest on my bucket list, or, you know, just too far out. And okay, I forgot to write this honorable mention in the script. I apologize, but let me like talk about Galacticoaster for a second. You know, just pulled up my ranking at this spot, but you know, this would probably be in between 6 and 7, being like in between Timbili and Incredicoaster, but okay. So Galacticoaster is one of those another examples where it's a roller coaster that I detach the theming and the ride experience, and I was like, in which I think the theming definitely brings it up a lot, but for me, I think the forces aren't really that spectacular. And there are like two main things I like to consider. One of them is the forces itself, where there's really like only like a couple of positive G's and stuff with like the cars that are spinning, and the fact that it has a nice tire propelled launch, but really not much happening. The second thing is the ride is a bit short, which these are both acceptable things for a Legoland park. And this is basically kind of like a junior coaster, but I'm still going to give this an honorable mention because it's not really a thrill coaster at all, and to begin with. But I'll say I'm excited to review that thing, and yeah, okay. Anyways, on to the honorable mention that's between 5 and 6 is Alpine Coaster at Glenwood Caverns, which is an Alpine coaster I haven't ridden in I think 2.5 years and really don't remember much. Hence the honorable mention status, but from what I could recall, it felt quite repetitive in airtime and laterals, as the main reason I don't think is a valid reason to rank this low, but you know, ranking stuff this early can be a bit problematic, and hopefully I can make it back to Glenwood Caverns to get a refreshed opinion, along with trying the other attractions at the park, as I am quite concerned about the park's future, which we'll discuss another day. But for now, we're going to move to spot number 5, which is Gold Rusher, and I think this is also a weird one too. As a comparison, I don't dislike the coaster as much as the previous ones. Really, this has like much more better forces and as in have much better laterals and more frequent forces. But this coaster also does have awkward pacing. Now, I get it's a mine train, but there is a lot of moments where the ride feels quite slow and meandering, not having much dynamic track. More slim slopes, up and down, and a tamer straight turns, if you know what I mean. Pacing is weird because the second lift is right after a fast 270-degree turn as well, which kind of puts the pacing on pause. Now I get that mine trains aren't really built for thrills. Really, there's more for the scenic areas, and that's totally acceptable for a ride to do. But from a thrill perspective, it's not really doing much. But trust me when I say that the Gold Rusher, compared to the bottom 4, is much more better, and really, those 4 I'm not much of a fan on. But first we get to another honorable mention. That's Crazy Mouse at my local fair. This is a spinning wild mouse that holds a layout that is solid forces, but my main problem with the ride is the maneuvers feel pretty basic, since it's mainly switchback turns and little drops. And that's much of the forces that aren't sustained and unique, since it feels quite repetitive. This doesn't get an official ranking as it is a traveling coaster after all. And then afterwards we have Canyon Blaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain, which is another honorable mention because it is a kiddie coaster. But I would argue this is my favorite non-Legoland kiddie coaster. Galactic Coaster and Dragon I feel like are far superior, but regardless. This is a kiddie coaster holding very interesting maneuvers for the time. Some okay laterals up front, sure, and some sharp airtime pushing the riders diagonally 4 times. This much more forces in general compared to other kiddie coasters, and it was a great honor to try out, even if it was my first credit of the year. Alright, now up to number 4. We have the half pipe through the Mac calls a coaster. Reptilian and King's Dominion is a bobsled coaster in the back row, and I would honestly say that this thing did barely anything. First off, little to no forces on the coaster is a turnoff usually for me, no matter what. But also the coaster doesn't even utilize the swinging much. It feels very mellow instead of out of control like what the technology is capable of. At that point, why should I really ride this outside of the unorthodox track style? Like, when I ride a half-pipe, I really want to feel like I'm swinging back and forth in an exaggerated fashion. Kind of like what aero suspended coasters does. Not feel like the ride has very little movement to the point where it doesn't really feel extreme at all. Like, actually radical movement, you know. On top of that, the coaster offers a consistent vibration that really isn't the best for a coaster doing so little. But at the very least, the coaster helixes have solid positives. Even then, that's barely anything in a coaster that holds track, and a coaster that I really don't have much interest in riding, sadly. Alright, next honorable mention goes to Patriot at Castles and Coasters. Okay, I think I got it right. Actually, no, I forgot. Blazing Buckaroo. Blazing Buckaroo is has nice laterals on the turns as a kiddie coaster. Yeah, kind of forceful one. And it is quite peppy, but otherwise it's not really too significant. That could also be considered with Patriot at Castles and Coasters. I would say that it has more forceful laterals, but regardless, I kind of felt like those had a little bit. There's like similar differences. I don't know. Next honorable mention is Flight of the Hippogriff at Universal Studios Hollywood. This is one of the more dynamic junior coasters that I've been on, with more varying and interesting twists, but the coaster lacks from the forces from the experience, having weak positive forces on the helix and a couple of lateral pops. It's still a nice twisty layout, but it doesn't do much. Now we have West Coaster to Santa Monica. Now, this is debatable if it's a junior coaster or not, but I'm going to count anyways. And to be honest, the roller coaster looks really pretty with the setting. After all, it is a pier on the ocean and has two nice floater pops in the back. Overall, I did find the coaster pretty forceless, if pretty bumpy helixes. But there was two nice quick pops of floater airtime, which was in quick succession, which was nice. And then up next we have Olympic bobsleds at the Night County Fair. A coaster that has nice pops of airtimes on the drop, but a lot of fillers since a lot of track holds no forces, which is a traveling coaster. And then we got Coastersaurus, which is a kiddie coaster that I don't remember much from, given I haven't ridden it in a decade. But from what I've heard, there's like a one good lateral movement on first drop, and then the rest is quite forceless. And then up next we have another Zyklon with Galaxy, this time with tamer forces. So basically just a couple of airtime pops and then nothing but filler. Okay. Timberline Twister was a nice little kiddie coaster, but I don't remember having much forces. Given I did ride it in the back and not in the front, I'm curious if there was if the airtime was in the front like many consider, but it was at the very least a long kiddie coaster and it was quite chilling. Plus it had kind of quirky trains and all, you know. Chippendale's Gadget Coaster, I have not been in over a decade, nor have been on any of the clones, so we'll save it for next time. Okay, so number 3 is Coast Rider. Now, with this thing, I could have experienced this to be a worse ranking than what it is right now, because a lot of people hate this ride for the shin guards. Thankfully, I did not receive the pain from the restraints, but there is a second flaw with the coaster that still warrants from the list. Now, I know I'm recording at 10:41 p.m. in the night, but, you know, I think we should all collect our rage just so we can talk about the quite literally the slowest, most tedious pacing that I've really experienced. Apart from the first drop that had nice speed, this ride was so goddamn slow and forceless. The turns are present on a Wild Mouse, no less. In terms of ride experience, I have been recently, as of this recording, less than 48 hours from when I rode Technicoaster. I'm talking about today, not when I rode Coast Rider. And that ride had much more considerable laterals and that were pretty engaging, and some positives on even some of the drops. Isn't mind-blowing laterals that you're gonna get on? Not really, but to be honest, it was actually quite fun and
impactful, forceful, whatever. It also was quite speedy on that one. Like turns would last as much as a normal wild mouse, like 2 seconds. Like straight sections take 2 seconds. Coast Rider took, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, even 6 seconds. I'm not sure. And in fact, Coast Rider originally dampened my opinion or taste to be, so like avoid Apple's Apple or even Technicoaster at first, which was a bit unfortunate, but and it's like it's like I would say that Coast Rider has worse pacing than a lot of kiddie coasters, to be honest. And really, it's like even without the stupid shin guards, it still deserves a bottom ranking. This is a coaster that we should just that even as a family coaster should really be engaging. Like, no matter if there's like no forces or whatever, there should be at least some sense of speed, to keep me engaged, or other riders. There is another redeeming quality that was smooth, but even though but that's not really much, to be honest. But to be honest, I dislike another mock coaster, and that is Journey to Atlantis. And which, for those who remember my SeaWorld San Diego video, I said this was the weakest non-kiddie coaster. And while this is no longer true, there's sadly a good reason as to why. Similar to Incredicoaster, this was a ride that also attempted a story with the coaster. But unlike Incredicoaster, where it had was built as a more thrilling and fast-paced coaster, plus at least more clear audio, Journey to Atlantis is a slow flume ride that has a lack of theming cohesion. As a dark ride, I find this to be very lacking, where it attempts an Atlantis story, but given the lack of scenery and props, much of the Atlantis lacks in scenes and immersion, and all we have is an echoey audio track about escaping Atlantis. This feels even more tedious than Incredicoaster, as you'll have an even longer time realizing your surroundings and checking them out, with less to do, given that the ride goes 4 to 5 miles per hour in the little sections, I feel like. And even weaker theming, as at least Incredicoaster at the start end does have animated, more detailed scenery. Hell, there's even a giant Jack at the end of the it was like an end of room for Incredicoaster, even though those don't feel like in this house. Like, so much potential was possible with the ride, especially with Orlando's being a legitimately dark ride, and really there's nothing here. But fine. What about the coaster portion itself? Believe it or not, I also find it quite underwhelming, as you can see with this list. A forceless piece of short track not doing much, some bumpiness to add on top of it. I personally don't find it interesting, even if it's more dynamic than other flume or water rides. I wish that SeaWorld San Diego got more thrilling or interesting flume ride. Hell, Mach makes more dynamic flume rides after San Diego, or even water coasters. I think I should be calling it that, but flume works too. Even Intamin made more ambitious flumes. I mean, just look at SeaWorld's neighbor park, SeaWorld San Antonio, coming, I think, around 19 years later with an Intamin product that has many quirks to it. It's like, even if we're not considering the time frame, it's like they could even gotten an Intamin Aquatrax, a fast-paced launch coaster utilizing water jets for a coolant system. Well, being fast-paced. Like, I get these options may not have been available, or were too extreme for the audience, or could have been too expensive, or may have been The restraints may have not been too accommodating toward families, but as somebody who wants more for SeaWorld San Diego, like more roller coasters, more rides to do, like just rides in general that they kind of lack and all, it is kind of in which they just want more than just a lackluster dark ride or a boring coaster. Surprisingly, that they're tallest and something who calls SeaWorld San Diego their home park. I want more room for their roller coasters. I am also kind of just sad this has to be this lower capacity, boring, and waste of potential boat coaster that really has like a nice concept to begin with. I would be saying this is more disappointing than my least favorite coaster at number 1. At the very least, this coaster is at least Journey to Atlantis. It's like has potential, which the other one did not, and this is not much of a bigger deal. So, up next is Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers as an honorable mention. Soon to be closing, I guess, but which one? I was like, is a Zamperla gravity coaster that holds an interesting profile valley after the first drop, but otherwise no force or speed. Now remember, this is just a kiddie coaster, but what's next is not a kiddie coaster. It is number 1, Roar at Six Flags America. Yes, the final boss at Six Flags America. I'm so excited, for me at least. So, what is Roar like? Well, I'll tell you with more spicier language, because after all, I definitely did not make this up in the spot, and I'm actually telling the truth. And for spicier language, imagine you see Speedy Gonzales Hot Rod Racers, that one coaster we talked beforehand, sized up to be a GCI layout, very twisty and quite meandery. As a tame Zamperla layout gets sized up and holds rough wooden coaster track throughout the course, like many other wooden coasters. That's not really Ghost Rider. That's not really Apocalypse. That's not really Grizzly. Then the coaster decides to be quite twisty, right? As I mentioned before, but decided to not really feel fast-paced. I mean, remember, we wanted to stay in 1998. There weren't many coasters that really had much fast pacing, as we all know. So we don't want to push our technology that much. Remember, 1998 also didn't have snappy rides, and pretty much. I mean, we wanted rides to feel slow, like Revirws Revenge or Mamba, or to be as straightforward as Volcano the Blast Coaster and Monty Kaya, or rough rides like Oblivion and Great Bear, or tame rides like Mr. Freezer, The Chiller, Ghost Rider, Boomerang, Thunderhawk, Inverted, Vertigo, Cobra. Who wrote this segment at the script? This doesn't seem to be a writing at. Well, I don't know. But I did see the guy run out of the office. A guy? What? Oh yeah, a random guy who would come in and out of the office since 2024. Wait, what? What did he do? I have no idea. Is this the reason as to why my office has tons of papers lying around? Fine. It's like, what did he at least say when he visited? Maybe we can identify him by his voice and face. I have no idea, but he did say a shirt saying West Coast Racers is not my cliffside panic. Oh, yeah, I have no idea what he means. Hold on, I have to check something real quickly. I'll be right back. Great. Now, the Floodscape 2 fans are finally angry. At least I have them on a cliffhanger. No, after I left them off a cliffhanger after unfinished animation storyboards and at least 2 years of no word about Season 2. But I last did a Season 2 of Diesel's Coaster Reviews. Well, I guess I need to get back to work, especially with a lot of newer maps and improved talent. hopefully after season 2 of the other show. But for now, here are the coasters that rank below Roar. Okay, so up next is Wild West Express. Like Roar, this is a quite boring coaster with no forces. But at least Wild West Express is smooth, you know. Although a kind of coaster that's more boring than Roar, I would say, that had like legitimately no forces. But would I say that Roar sucks? Yes, definitely. Roar is a bumpy mess that did nothing for me. Anyways, moving on. Puppy Express is a wacky worm that I haven't been on since they've been a Come-In enthusiast. I think wacky worms don't look that special, to be honest. The same for the other wacky worm that's literally named a wacky worm. And then the final coaster, as right now, I've ridden 79 roller coasters. And for a little, which is Little Dipper. It's an oval layout. I've heard it's rough and janky, but I haven't been on it for a long time. So yeah, this was my list. I hope you enjoyed my April Fool's thing. If I'm being serious, I have been genuine with my thoughts. But yeah, this is a bit tiring. I wanted to speed up editing. I only had 3 days. If I did get it out on April 1st, so. There you go. Hope you enjoyed. I hope I can get the next video out. See ya.